Let's return now to that security discussion around the Solomons. Joining me is Sam Roggeveen. He's director of the Lowy security program, the international security program at the Lowy Institute. Sam, this deal to boost the Solomon Islands police force, is it a significant step forward?
Well, as we've talked about a number of times, Kieran, there's a game afoot in the Pacific Islands, a game for influence, and we've seen it recently in the deal that Australia signed with Nauru, and we're now seeing it again in the Solomon Islands. Significantly, Solomon signed a security agreement with China just last year, and now Australia has announced an agreement on policing as well. So essentially what we're seeing is another example of competition for influence in this part of the world. The good news here is that Australia's playing that game pretty well. As the recent successes indicate, we have some important natural advantages here too. The Pacific Islands is very much closer to Australia than it is to China. We have sporting, cultural, economic ties with the Pacific Islands region that the Chinese don't have. Our aid effort in the Pacific Islands by far outranks what China does, even though China is growing fast. And I'd say finally, there's an imbalance of resolve. The Pacific Islands region is just more important to us than it is to China. So this is another example, I think, of that game. And yeah, there is a whack-a-mole element to it. Everywhere China wants to put its stamp on the region, Australia responds. So that's difficult, and it's a tough game that Australia's playing, but we seem to be playing it pretty well right now.
What about the US view on all of this? I know the Pentagon has just released its annual report on Chinese military power. What's it found?
Yeah, so look, I mean, a bit of connective tissue here is that the ultimate fear in Australia is that China sets up agreements with one or more Pacific Islands country to actually establish a Chinese military presence in the Pacific. That would be disastrous for Australia, so we're aiming to prevent that. Now, in the meantime, what we're seeing in this new Pentagon report shows it is that China is continuing the really dramatic expansion of its military capabilities. So the Congress demands that the Pentagon produce this report every year. The latest one has just come out a day or so ago, and that report illustrates again, that substantial expansion of Chinese military forces, particularly nuclear. Now, for Australia, I would say the most important element is, can China project its power over vast distances? Because we do, I think, routinely underestimate in Australia how large the distances are. Beijing's closer to Berlin than it is to Sydney. We often forget that. So how well can China actually project its power over long distances? And there, I think the news is still pretty good, because the Pentagon report reflects, I think, my assessment that China does still have major challenges in that regard, and also that its basing initiatives around the region are still in their infancy. So There's been some talk about a base in Cambodia, but that doesn't look to be a full-fledged military base. And again, in the Pacific, they still have a big fight ahead of them.
Just finally, Donald Trump, we're seeing possible implications of his comments in the Middle East already unfolding, with a truce maybe on the way before the end of the year. But what's your read on the capacity for Donald Trump to deliver a major diplomatic initiative in his second term?
Yeah, well, this is the thing I'd watch for, I think, in the first year of his term. And sometimes it feels like he's president already, right? Some of the comments that he's making and the behaviour from his team. And making what look like diplomatic visits to Paris, for instance. It's quite extraordinary. But look, I think as a general rule, we underestimate how radical the Trump administration could be domestically, but also in foreign policy. Trump wanted to do some grand bargains in his first term. The system kind of prevented it. It fought back. The system is weaker now, and the people he has in his team are stronger. So I think look at Russia, look at China, and look at North Korea. Those are the three potential areas where I can see Trump making major diplomatic initiatives that are really overturn the security order in those parts of the world. That, of course, has major implications for Australia.
It does indeed. Well, great to get your insights as always. Sam Roggeveen, Director of the Lowy Institute's International Security Program. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll see you next year.